Me to be here and speak on behalf of cities. I think I'd like to look at the cooling problem from three angles when it comes to city, or potentially the solutions. The first is for us to recognize that whilst temperatures are rising everywhere in the world, the experience of our residents differs markedly depending on where you are. So whether you're living in Manhattan and can afford air conditioning, or you're living in a slum community in Freetown and can't afford air conditioning, the temperatures are still rising. So the question of cooling is critical to us all, but as we look at this conversation and we look at the pledge, we must contextualize it. From a city's perspective, not only are we able to, in some instances, bring in regulations that have been mentioned in the context of governments, regulations for cooling being built into the built environment. That is happening in a city like Copenhagen, where they are really leading the way with using building regulations to ensure cooling is built in. But that can also be done with more simple architectural design. And from a city's perspective, we'd like to, as this cooling pledge goes out, remind everyone that that is a role that we can play as cities. Of course, mention has been made of the energy that's used to power the coolants, power the air conditioners. Renewable energy is more affordable now, but it's not available for everyone. And that, again, from a city's perspective, is something we need to think about. And in case you haven't noticed, I'm really looking at this from a city's perspective and not just from a Freetown perspective, because as this pledge is made by national governments, we want to ensure that national governments are also signing up to the CHAMP, which was launched this week, which is the Coalition of High-Level Multi-Level Action Partnerships. Effectively, national governments include city action in your NDCs, because if we do that, then our chances of the cooling pledge being effectively not just signed but implemented are higher. And I say this because 75% of the cities in C40 cities, which I co-chair, are cutting emissions faster than their national government. So the cooling element of that would be integrated if we're also ensuring that cities are at the table. Market cooling, health cooling, home cooling. I'd like to leave you with a picture. Imagine a slum community, an informal settlement, the housing made of corrugated iron, and on the side, an air conditioner. The aspiration of everyone as temperatures rise and incomes rise is that their wealth is measured by their cooling. And it's so critical and important that a pledge at this time bears that in mind, not only from the perspective of improving the efficiency of the air conditioners being made, but ensuring that we are also getting the cities at the table so that the localized renewable energy solutions, such as off-grid solar solutions in communities, similar to what we've just been doing in some areas, in some C40 cities, can also be incorporated. Thank you very much. And as Inga has said, let's continue to be cool.
Thank you very much, Ms. Akisoya. So now to present the key findings of this report, we have Lily Riahi, who is the Global Coordinator of the UNEP-led Cool Coalition.
Thank you so much. Good morning. I'm very pleased to be here to present the findings from the Global Cooling Watch report, which was developed in collaboration with more than 50 contributing experts around the world. The report certainly comes at a pivotal moment as the world is breaking new and alarming emission and temperature records. How to keep cool while cutting emissions is a question many countries, cities, and regions are asking. One of the first findings in the report is that we are seeing a rising demand for power-hungry cooling equipment. Globally, cooling currently accounts for 20% of electricity use. Without any further action, the demand for cooling equipment will skyrocket, which is what you see here. It will grow, it will triple by 2050, and that impact will be that it'll double our electricity consumption. And that's because, as we've heard from our speakers today, we need cooling for nutrition, for food, for health, and for prosperity. Cooling is much more than air conditioning. It is about the resilience of our food systems and keeping food fresh and accessible through reliable cold chains. Currently, 12% of food produced is lost every year because of a lack of sustainable cold chain. If we improve universal vaccine access, we can prevent 1.5 million deaths annually. So it's also about our health. And of course, as Mayor Yvonne was saying, it's also about protecting our societies from extreme heat and working in safe and healthy environments. And it's about climate justice. Often the poorest and the most vulnerable are the hardest hit from rising temperatures and the least prepared. But the irony is that currently the way that we're cooling is causing us to further heat the planet. So cooling is a double burden when it comes to climate change. It consumes a lot of electricity because of inefficient air conditioners in poorly designed buildings. And cooling equipment often uses refrigerants that are very strong greenhouse gas emissions. That are really strong greenhouse gases. The sector currently, what we found is that the sector currently accounts for 7% of emissions globally. And if we don't change, as Inger highlighted, this will double by 2050. Now, the report studies pathways into the future, and what you see in the middle, I don't have a pointer, but it's the middle blue bar, is where we will get with emissions with existing policies. You will see that emissions rise to 6.1 billion tons of CO2 equivalent, which is roughly 10% of global projected emissions in 2050. But if we use passive cooling measures to reduce cooling load for both space cooling and cold chain, so this is cool roofs, reflective surfaces, bringing nature back into cities, ventilation, insulation, we see a significant reduction. In fact, about 24% of cooling load can be reduced through these solutions. Second, increasing the use of energy efficient technologies and practices. And finally, a fast phase down of refrigerants, climate warming refrigerants under the Kigali Amendment. Taken together, these can deliver the 60% emission reductions in 2050 and cut emissions by 3.8 billion tons of CO2. Now, because cooling is mostly powered by electricity, to get us to near zero emissions, we need to fully decarbonize electricity generation by 2050. And doing so allows us to achieve the 96% reduction and an additional 2 billion tons of CO2, which you see in the furthest right of the graph. These are entirely novel findings that UNEP is bringing to the attention of decision makers. No study so far has looked at the totality of cooling emissions and looking at it across all sectors, nor the benefits of the comprehensive approach that we're hearing panelists speak about today, and how that can get us on the pathway to near zero emissions. And importantly, the report also finds that 73% of this emission reduction potential is with G20 countries. Now, the benefits of this transition are significant, as we've heard. We see electricity savings of $1 trillion annually in 2050 for consumers, or cumulatively $17 trillion of savings in electricity for end users or consumers. As Inger already highlighted, it's also a reduction in peak load of 1.5 to 2 terawatts by 2050. This allows us to avoid $4 to $5 trillion of investment in new power generation. And as was highlighted, it makes it possible for an additional 3.5 billion people to have fridges, air conditioners, or access to passive cooling solutions in 2050. So how do we make this a reality? Well, what's important is deeper efforts in the 3 key action areas and integration across them to avoid a siloed approach and ensure a faster implementation. Some of the most impactful policies include incorporating passive cooling into building energy codes, as well as nature-based approaches into urban planning. On efficiency, ratcheting up minimum energy performance standards for space cooling and refrigeration, and aligning this with the HFC phase down. So that's incorporating these criteria into those policies and incorporating both into building codes. So it's an aligned, integrated approach. And third is faster phase down of HFC refrigerants through regulations, better life cycle management, and training. Now, cooling is not a sector in most countries, and cooperation between ministries is not always easy. Therefore, you need plans, national cooling action plans, or regulations at the national level that enable this multi-stakeholder, cross-ministry approach to implement cooling. And finally, we need to scale finance instruments and business models that have proven to tackle one of the main barriers, which is that while sustainable cooling saves money and the environment, it can have higher upfront costs. And the trillions of dollars that we see in savings need to be captured through proven business models to make the transition affordable for all. And with the global cooling pledge that is being spearheaded by the Cop28 presidency, we have a great opportunity to scale action. The pledge actually is built on the results and the recommendations of this report. So it is a moment to translate these findings into a transformation of this sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lily. We will move to questions. We have just 5 minutes if there are any questions from the audience. We have somebody up here. Someone will bring you a mic. Front row, yes. Thank you. Please identify yourself and the media house you represent.
Hello, Gloria Dickey with Reuters. I'm just wondering on the pledge if you can share how many countries have currently signed up and how you'll measure success in terms of both numbers and key joiners later today. Thank you.
Sure. So over 60 countries have signed up currently to the pledge. And in terms of measuring success, there is a criteria for reporting on an annual basis on the commitments. And the Global Cooling Watch report has put in place the infrastructure for being able to track policy progress on an annual basis, and also to look at the science, so to look at the impact of that on emissions globally, and therefore track progress on the global targets that have been set in the pledge. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any additional questions from the audience? If not, then we will wrap up. Thank you very much.
Go ahead. One point, and that is to recognize IFC, because I shamedly faced to do so. IFC took responsibility for the finance chapter, and we are very, very grateful for this collaboration. And of course, when IFC leans in on an issue, we also know with the Brain Trust, there's also an opportunity for leaning in on the investment side, which is obviously something that we are very hopeful that that will also emerge over time. So my deep thanks to IFC for this leadership.
Many thanks to our speakers and to the members of the press online and in the room. We are available for interviews if you would like these, and the materials are all available on UNEP's website. Thanks very much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.